So, I wanted to talk to you guys again about the topic of learning our spiritual lessons. And this is actually like a really complex topic. I know I've worked with it for so long. And when you think about it, it's kind of interesting because you think about, well, what makes it a spiritual lesson? Think about the other things that you continue to learn. For example, as an adult, what really constitutes new learning, like new deep learning. A lot of the time when people talk about learning a lesson, they're actually only referring to, for example, conditioning, right? Like maybe you have a bad experience with such and such, and then you kind of avoid it. That's not really learning a lesson. That's just like, okay, you were conditioned by a certain, maybe very stressful, maybe traumatic experience. And then you'll say, I learned my lesson. I'm not going to do that again. But that's really a superficial layer. That's just like the layer of the accidental conditioning. A deeper, like, spiritual lesson is going to involve yourself, like your own patterns, like what you brought to an experience, and literally like the schemas and frameworks that you're working with psychologically. So going beyond conditioning, actually. And you've also heard, the way we talk about being tested, like the universe is testing you. Did you understand the lesson? And so we also want to think about the real difference too between these lessons and tests. So I know for sure from my own experience working with this that this is not at all obvious for reasons I've just said. And so we want to work to identify a lesson when you know a lesson is actually happening or available to you, so to speak, and then how to decipher it, how to read it, how to study it, how to parse its own language, so to speak. And then finally, what it means to be quote unquote tested on that, right? So Earth is a school, this is a classroom. We are here for specific experiences and lessons and being tested on these lessons. So I just want to do some more work thinking in this area with you. And before I move on, I apologize. There's like a little bit of a fan in the background. I hope it's not too distracting, but some of the neighbors are making noise and I tested it and this is better than the alternative. So we're just going to proceed. Okay, so you've probably heard some version of the idea that the more you advance spiritually or the more you grow in your own self-awareness and these kinds of things, then the quicker you can move through your own karma, or the more karma you will burn or clear. And I had a friend actually share this lesson with me when I was like 18 or something, some version of this where basically it's a really good sign if the karma comes to you like very quickly, like if kind of like counting lightning strikes, like if it speeds up because the veil is thinner, right? Like you have more awareness available and you're able to sort of see the train of your own cause and effect just that much sooner. And so I think there's a lot of truth to this. And it's interesting to think about, like I was playing around with this idea, for example, in terms of the density that we commonly live in. We live across various levels of density, right? Some aspects of our being live in like the darkest, heaviest kinds of 3D density, and aspects are quite in more subtle realms as well. So when you think about the perception of karma as a kind of like causal chain of cause and effect or action and consequence, think about our experience of gravity here in the 3D, right? We have so much awareness available within this density. So this is a different way of talking about it, awareness, but hang on. Perception is quite, our perception is attuned so finely to the 3D that we can perceive gravity like instantly. It's a universal law within this domain, and we just perceive its effects instantly. But as we move through more subtle energetic layers, or as our actions may be more energetic in nature or have more energetic consequences, I feel that's part of the reason why there may be a delay in your own perception or in certain qualities of your own awareness about it. And I think we can probably eventually start to map that onto higher dimensions or more rare, fine, subtle densities, so to speak, of our experience. But that was just a little sidebar. Very interesting though. But let's continue with like 3 points that I want to raise, and then you can let me know if this also resonates with you or how you've experienced this similarly or differently than I say it. But for example, the first point is that regarding lessons like this, the universe does teach us through direct experience, which is not as straightforward as it seems. But this essentially means it follows from the fact that we have very specific perspectives here. Obviously, we have access to our own first person perspective. I don't have access to your internal subjective perspective. I don't even have access through the behaviors that I see from you. The closest I can get is through direct communication, i.e., self-report of your own internal experience, your thoughts, your feelings. I do not have access to that through anything else that I can observe from you. And so we have like this infinity of perspectives that are available, that are occurring, but we only have access to our own. So it's very limited and finite in that sense. And so at the risk of stating all the obvious again, for example, let's say like I am working towards my own freedom, or I am working towards such and such a value. For example, I have the value of honesty, I have the value of authenticity, and I wish that for others as well. And so I take a series of actions, or maybe I'm saying something that is an expression of this value, and from my perspective is a commitment to this quality in such a way that, you know, I would want it for others as well. But maybe my action ends up having a consequence that didn't fit or was not part of the paradigm that I had access to. Maybe there is another dimension of that, which within someone else's perspective and their experience, all of a sudden, you know, maybe that doesn't actually contribute to the qualities that I thought I was participating in or making available. Do you see what I mean? You know about this. And so that does kind of set up a little bit of like a cause and effect type of situation, because we're dealing with different perspectives, right? Kind of like a staircase, or just, you know, the place where the wood meets the concrete and it's not totally even, right? Like there's a tiny bit of a gap. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's just like this tiny bit of a gap because you're dealing with different perspectives. And so for example, let's say that person or the situation moves in a direction that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Maybe it caused harm in some way. And maybe you don't have access to some of those causal chains. And then you can feel like, oh no, you can tell, like, I will often say, you know, this isn't the kind of like dent in the universe that I wanted to make, right? When your actions or your expression or your being, it creates an effect that wasn't really part of your paradigm. This is totally natural. This is going to happen for everybody, right? This is not like a deficiency and so the fact that there is this gap in there, that doesn't mean that, you know, you're like lower in consciousness or deficient in any way, as I said. It's just the mechanics of the situation, right? And that gap is what kind of alerts us to this feeling of like, okay, I need to learn about this. I need to understand, like, what is this gap? What is the gap in my understanding? And so that's part of the lesson, right? That's kind of like the immediate lesson. And then there's going to be a deeper lesson that kind of like works as an envelope for the entire thing. So let's go back to what I said in the beginning with the idea that as we grow in awareness and in sincerity and our spiritual intentionality, we may move through some of these situations a lot sooner. We may move through these lessons a lot quicker. And by that I mean, for example, that you might end up having like 2 or more of these lessons overlapping at the same time, kind of stacked in a way, like weights, right? Like now you're lifting whatever it is, like 120 pounds or whatever it is. You can handle more, right? We're going to stack these lessons so that they're all happening at the same time because they're related in some way. And so the lesson of the lesson is going to be this like deeper pattern or deeper gap in your awareness that you are going to be working with. So for example, one of your lessons may be a reflection of the other one. So let's say in situation A, there was some kind of gap in your awareness with respect to the situation or event or person, a gap in your awareness that will be reflected in situation B that now you're experiencing at the same time, because now the universe is giving you this opportunity to kind of see that from a different point of view. So you may find yourself going through feelings or thoughts or experiences in such a way that it's giving you this positive, direct impression, snapshot, experience of exactly what you didn't have access to in situation A. So let me know if this just sounds totally obvious. I mean, it will now that I say it, but if you have experienced it also in this sense. So more concretely, for example, maybe you're in a situation where, you're kind of being shown or asked in some way to just let go, to just kind of, stop holding on in a certain way. This could be conceptually, it could be emotionally. And then at the same time, you find yourself in another situation where now you feel that you need to find a way to let someone else let you go, so to speak. There isn't a good way to say this. Or maybe it's kind of like creating a certain boundary for yourself or a certain communication that you need in such a way that it's kind of like it shows you the possible reflection of what you didn't have access to in situation A. Now, what I think is really interesting is that a lot of the time, communication can serve this purpose too, right? For example, if it's between 2 or more people and there's a gap in understanding, I mean, this is literally like the original impetus of education, right? It's a type of communication directed at certain kinds of gaps in our understanding that some people have access to and others don't have access to. And you know what? It would really help you if you also had access. And so we're going to make this available and distribute this knowledge in such a way that more people have access and don't experience these same kinds of gaps that others may. That's just one angle on education. That's a whole other topic. But you see my point about the gap in the understanding and how we have evolved certain disciplines, so to speak, for filling in these gaps and literally conveying certain lessons. So I'm just going to bracket that aside because I know a lot of people have education wounds and that's a very real thing. I talk about that. I can, I've worked as an instructor, as a teacher on various levels. I'm still a proponent of higher education in various forms. There is a lot of innovation available in this area, but let's just keep that. That's just a sidebar for now. So the final point I wanted to bring up for discussion, let me know how it lands with you, but it's the fact that some lessons, and I've alluded to this in a previous video, some lessons, I think they run so deep, like they call on some of the quote-unquote densest parts of our energy field, perhaps because they do originate in a past life, or they are just like some of the deepest lessons that we are here to learn because they will affect every aspect of our experience. And so for those, keeping in line with the fact that the universe does teach us through direct experience, these ones can feel like we are literally being dragged through a certain lesson, like dragged, because either we don't, because the gap is so large in our awareness, maybe we weren't able to avoid something or what have you. It could be many things. But precisely because of this experience of feeling dragged, we may bring even more resistance to it, which can slow it down even further. So it's just totally crazy. It's almost like a downward spiral effect. And that's why those ones can take the longest to learn, because it can literally require more time for you to connect the dots and to like see the full shape of that experience and what you may be contributing to that. So think about that in your own life. What do you think are some of the experiences that fit that for you? And then how can you start to view those as, you know, there's some gap in your understanding here. There's a lesson that you're meant to learn here. And again, this has to go beyond the level of mere conditioning. So beyond, you know, I need to avoid this, or I'm going to seek this out, like pain, pleasure, kinds of like avoidant types of orientations. That's not actually learning a lesson. That's not teaching you anything about yourself as a spirit, as a, you know, consciously directed soul or agent or individual, right? So we have to go beyond the layer of mere conditioning to actually get at our spiritual lesson. So let me know if that's been insightful or helpful in any way, and, you know, share with me in the comments like what lessons you've been working on, if you've noticed that like a specifically hard lesson that has been very obscure, like it's lasted years, maybe decades of your life. It comprised so much of the background or so much of your bedrock that it just took you so long to even notice it. So let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't. That will really help. And do check out some of my earlier videos for more context on what I'm doing. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.